They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. I think revenge is best served at approximately 65 miles per hour, slightly thawed to a slushy consistency, and aimed directly at a mesmerizing display of catered shrimp cocktails. But before we get to the ballistics, the screaming, the police sirens, and the sheer aerodynamic beauty of a year's worth of canine fecal matter taking flight across property lines, we have to talk about the bin. I'm a simple guy. My name is Mark, I'm 32, I work in systems engineering, and I like order. I like things to make sense. In the chaotic tapestry of suburban American life, where homeowners associations rule like petty feudal lords and the length of your grass is a matter of public debate, there are very few victories as pure and absolute as Empty Bin Day. You know what I'm talking about. It's Tuesday morning. You hear the rumble of the heavy diesel engine down the street. It's a guttural, prehistoric sound. You hear the hydraulic whine, the crash of plastic against metal, the hiss of the air brakes, and then the receding roar of the garbage truck as it moves on to the next victim. You walk out to the curb in your slippers, holding your morning coffee, and you grab the handle of your wheelie bin. It's light. It feels weightless. It's empty. It's a fresh start. For the next 6 days, you have capacity. You have potential. It is a sacred window of time where your property is clean, void of the refuse of the previous week. Or at least, it's supposed to be. My neighbor is Mrs. Higgins. To call Mrs. Higgins a neighbor is like calling a shark a swimming partner. Mrs. Higgins is a woman who looks like she was manufactured in a factory that exclusively produces HOA board presidents and people who send back soup at delis. She is 70-something, wears floral print blouses that cost more than my monthly car payment, and has a hairstyle that defies wind, gravity, and the laws of thermodynamics. It is a helmet of white hair, sprayed into a shape that suggests she is always bracing for impact. She lives in the house to my right, a pristine colonial with a lawn so green it looks like it was painted on by Disney animators. It's the kind of lawn that makes you feel guilty for walking on it. And then there is Princess. Princess is a Shih Tzu, technically. Spiritually, Princess is a screeching rat filled with hate, entitlement, and high-protein kibble. Princess hates everything. She hates the mailman. She hates the wind. She hates me, and judging by the sounds she makes when she eats, a sort of wet, desperate snuffling, she hates herself. But Mrs. Higgins loves her. Mrs. Higgins walks her 3 times a day, strutting down the sidewalk with a pink retractable leash, looking for offenses to report to the neighborhood watch. The war started on a Tuesday in early April. It was a beautiful spring morning, the kind of morning that sells real estate. The birds were singing, the dew was glistening on the hydrangeas, and the garbage truck had just turned the corner at the end of the block, leaving my bin wonderfully, beautifully empty. I was standing in my kitchen, brewing my 2nd cup of coffee, looking out the window that faces the street. I was watching my empty bin with a sense of deep satisfaction, mentally preparing to go out and drag it back to the garage. I was happy. I was at peace. That's when I saw her. Mrs. Higgins came waddling down her driveway, Princess straining at the leash, yapping at a squirrel that had the audacity to exist in her peripheral vision. They stopped right at the property line. Princess assumed the position. I watched, sipping my coffee. Fine. Dogs poop. It's part of the social contract. We all live here. We all deal with biology. Mrs. Higgins produced a small, neon green plastic bag from her pocket. She bent down with surprising agility for a woman who claimed she couldn't shovel her own snow, and she did. The scoop. She tied the knot. Good citizen. Standard procedure. I was about to turn away, to go back to my toast, when the violation occurred. Instead of walking back to her own trash cans, which were currently sitting at the top of her driveway, empty and waiting, not 30 feet away, she took a sharp left turn. She stepped onto my driveway. She walked up to my bin. She lifted the lid. I froze. My coffee cup hovered halfway to my mouth. No, I thought. She wouldn't. She dropped the neon green package inside. Thud. It wasn't a loud noise, but I felt it in my soul. She closed the lid, gave a little satisfied pat to the plastic, and waddled back to her house. I stood there for a full 10 seconds, processing the geometry of the insult. The truck had just left. That bin was empty. That bag of poop wasn't just going to sit on top of a pile of other trash. It was going to sit on the bare, scratched plastic bottom of the bin. And since the truck wasn't coming back for 7 days, that poop was going to sit there. In the sun. For a week. I put the coffee down. I put on my shoes. I didn't even bother to change out of my sweatpants. I walked out the front door. "Mrs. Higgins!" I called out. My voice was friendly. I was going for the friendly neighbor vibe. I didn't want a war, not yet. I just wanted to correct a misunderstanding. She stopped halfway up her driveway and turned slowly. Princess growled at me, a sound like a garbage disposal chewing on a spoon. Mrs. Higgins adjusted her glasses and peered at me. "Good morning, Mark," she said. Her voice was sweet, syrup thick with that specific brand of suburban condescension. "Isn't it a lovely day? The azaleas are finally coming in." "It is," I said, jogging down to the sidewalk to bridge the distance. "Hey, sorry to bother you, but I just saw you drop your dog bag in my bin." She stared at me. She didn't blink. Her eyes were like cold, polished marbles. "Yes?" "Well," I said, gesturing to the bin as if it were a witness to a crime. "The truck just left, Mrs. Higgins. It literally just drove away. I saw the taillights." "I know, dear. I heard it. It's terribly loud. I've been meaning to write to the city about the noise decibels before 8 a.m. "Right. So, since the truck just left, that bag is going to be in there for a whole week. It's going to bake in there. It makes the bin smell terrible, and when I throw my actual trash in later, it's going to squish it." She offered a small, pitying smile. It was the kind of smile you give a toddler who is crying because they dropped their ice cream in the sand. "Mark, it's a garbage can. It's designed for garbage. I really don't see what the fuss is about." "The fuss," I said, my smile straining at the edges, my left eye developing a slight twitch, "is that it's my garbage can. And your garbage cans are right there." I pointed to her bins. They were right there. I could see them. They were pristine. "Why didn't you put it in yours?" "Mine were already pulled up," she said, as if this explained everything, as if this were a law of physics I had failed to understand. "I didn't want to walk all the way back up the drive. My sciatica is flaring up today. Besides, your bin was right there. It's public property when it's on the curb, you know." I took a deep breath. I channeled my inner systems engineer. I tried to explain the logic. "Actually, it's not public property. The curb is a public easement. The bin belongs to the waste management company, leased to me, the homeowner. I pay the bill. And the smell? The smell belongs to everyone." "You're being dramatic," she sniffed. She tugged on Princess's leash. "Come along, Princess. The nasty man is being aggressive." I'm not being aggressive, I said, taking a step forward, my voice rising just a fraction of an octave. I'm asking you to take your dog poop out of my bin, please. She turned her back to me. I'm not reaching into a trash can, Mark. That's unsanitary. Have a blessed day. And she walked away. She just walked away. She didn't run. She didn't hurry. She sauntered up her driveway, stopped to admire a tulip, and then disappeared into her house. I stood there on the sidewalk, stunned. I looked at my bin. I opened the lid. The green bag looked tiny at the bottom of the massive 96-gallon container. It looked innocent. But I knew better. It was a seed of chaos. I reached in. I almost grabbed it. But then I stopped. Why should I grab it? If I grabbed it, I was solving her problem. I was validating her laziness. If I moved it, I was accepting the premise that she could do whatever she wanted and I would just clean it up. No. I left the bag there. I dragged the bin back to my garage, the little green bag tumbling around inside like a lottery ball from hell. By Thursday, the temperature had hit 80 degrees. An unseasonably warm front had moved in. When I went to throw a bag of kitchen trash in, the smell hit me like a physical slap. It wasn't just poop, it was hot poop, fermented in a plastic convection oven. The heat had caused the bag to expand, bloating like a sickly green balloon. Flies were already gathering, buzzing around the rim like planes circling an airport. I gritted my teeth. It's just 1 week, I told myself. She won't do it again. She made her point. The next Tuesday came. I woke up early. I was proactive. I listened for the truck like a hunter listening for prey. As soon as it roared past, I ran outside to pull my bin in. I was going to beat her to it. I dragged the bin up the driveway, past the garage, and tucked it behind the gate. Safe, secure. I went back inside to get my coffee, feeling a smug sense of victory. I had outsmarted the system. When I came back out 10 minutes later to head to work, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a green bag sitting in the middle of my driveway. She hadn't put it in the bin because the bin was gone. So she had dropped it exactly where the bin used to be. It was sitting on the asphalt, right in the center of the oil stain from my old Honda. I stared at the bag. It was tied with a cheerful little knot. It was a statement. It was a territory marker. It was a declaration of war. I looked over at her house. The curtains in her living room twitched. Just a little. She was watching. She wanted to see what I would do. I picked up the bag. It was warm. Disgustingly warm. I walked over to her porch. I didn't throw it. I didn't smear it. I placed it gently, reverently, on her welcome friend's doormat. I went to work. I felt good. I felt like justice had been served. I came home from work that evening to find a note taped to my front door. It was on official HOA stationery. The paper was thick, cream-colored, with a watermark. Notice of violation. Date: April 14th. Resident: Mark Davidson violation. Improper disposal of biohazardous waste. Harassment of a board member. Description: Resident was seen placing fecal matter on the porch of the HOA president. This is a violation of Bylaw 4.2, Sanitary Standards, and Bylaw 9.1, Neighborly Conduct. Continued aggression will result in fines starting at $500 and potential legal action. Signed, Mrs. E. Higgins, HOA President. I stood there reading the note, and I felt something snap. It wasn't a loud snap. It was a quiet, metallic click in the back of my brain. It was the sound of a safety being switched off. It was the sound of a bridge being burned. She was the HOA president. Of course she was. I hadn't paid enough attention to the last newsletter. She held all the cards. She had the legal high ground, or at least the bureaucratic high ground. If I fought this in the open, if I kept putting it back on her porch, she would fine me into bankruptcy. She would put a lien on my house. She would ruin me. I walked into my house. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. I sat down at my kitchen island and stared at the wall. "Okay," I said to the empty room. "You want to play games? Let's play games." The next morning, Wednesday, I watched her. I hid behind my blinds. She came out with Princess. Princess did her business. Mrs. Higgins bagged it. She walked to my driveway. She looked around. She saw my bin was still behind the gate. She walked up the driveway, unlatched my gate, walked into my backyard, opened the bin, dropped the bag in, and walked out. Trespassing. She was trespassing now. I could have called the cops. But what would they do? Write a report? Tell her to stay off the property? She would deny it. She would say she was checking for code violations. No. The police were a blunt instrument. I needed a scalpel, or more accurately, I needed a siege weapon. I went to the garage. I looked at the empty space next to my workbench. I measured it. That night, I went to Home Depot. I walked past the shovels. I walked past the no trespassing signs. I walked past the motion sensor sprinklers. I went to the appliance section. "Can I help you?" the orange-aproned teenager asked. "I need a freezer," I said. "Chest style, deep freeze." "What size?" "Big enough to hold a significant amount of biological samples," I said. The kid blinked. "Like deer meat?" "Sure," I said. "Let's go with that." I bought a 5-cubic-foot chest freezer. Energy efficient. Lockable lid. I also bought a box of heavy-duty industrial-strength vacuum seal bags and a high-end food vacuum sealer. I set it up in the garage. I plugged it in. The hum was soothing. It sounded like the engine of a spaceship warming up. The next morning, Mrs. Higgins did it again. I had left the bin out on purpose this time, a lure. I watched from the window as she dropped the payload. She looked smug. She thought she had won. She thought the note had scared me into submission. She thought I was broken. I waited until she went inside. I walked out to the bin. I was wearing thick rubber sensei, gloves, and a respirator mask I use for spray painting furniture. I carried a pair of 18-inch barbecue tongs. I reached in. I clamped the tongs around the green bag. I lifted it out. It was heavy. Princess had been eating well. I carried the bag into the garage. I placed it inside one of the heavy-duty freezer bags. I took a black permanent marker and wrote on the outside of the plastic. Date, April 16th. Time, 07:42 a.m. Weight, approx. 0.4. Consistency. Firm origin. The beast. I placed the bag in the vacuum sealer. Whirr, clunk. The machine sucked out the air, preserving the freshness, locking in the aroma for a future date. It looked clinical. It looked professional. I tossed the sealed package into the bottom of the empty freezer. It made a hollow thunk against the white metal floor. "One?" I whispered. The collection had begun. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it yet. I just knew that I couldn't throw it away. Throwing it away felt like throwing away evidence. It felt like admitting defeat. Every bag she dropped was an insult. Every bag was a bullet she was firing at me. I was just catching them. And sooner or later, I was going to fire them back. Over the next few weeks, I became a phantom. I never complained to her again. I never yelled. I would wave to her when I saw her at the mailbox. "Lovely day, Mrs. Higgins," I'd call out, my voice dripping with artificial sweetener. "It certainly is, Mark," she'd reply, adjusting her sun hat, probably thinking she had successfully trained me. She looked at me with the satisfaction of a lion tamer who had broken a particularly stubborn cat. She had no idea she was fueling an armory. My freezer began to fill up. It was a fascinating, horrifying study in biology. There were the heavy, sluggish bags from the rainy weeks, the lighter, dried-out specimens from the heat of July. I organized them. I categorized them. I stacked them like bricks of gold. I had to be careful. I kept the garage locked. I told my girlfriend, Sarah, that I was storing sensitive materials for a project at work. "What kind of materials?" she asked one night, eyeing the locked freezer. "Organic compounds," I said. "Very volatile." "You're weird," she said, and went back to watching Netflix. But secrets in a relationship are a ticking time bomb, and this particular secret smelled worse than most. Sarah found out in September. She was looking for vodka. We usually kept a bottle in the kitchen freezer, but we were out, and she thought maybe I had stashed some in the work freezer in the garage. I was in the living room watching a football game when I heard the scream. It wasn't a terrified scream. It was a confused, horrified, existential sound. It was the sound of a human being looking into the abyss, and the abyss looking back in the form of vacuum-sealed dog waste. "Mark!" I ran into the garage. She was standing there, the lid open, staring down at the frosty horde. The untrained eye, it looked like I was a serial killer who specialized in very small, soft victims. "Close the lid!" I shouted, rushing forward. "What is this?" she demanded, backing away, holding the handle of the vacuum sealer like a weapon. "Mark, tell me right now. Are these—" "It's poop," I said, raising my hands in surrender. "It's all poop." "Why?" she whispered. "Why is there so much of it? Why is it dated? Why is it color-coded?" "Sit down," I said, grabbing a stool. "I need to tell you a story." I told her everything. The inciting incident, the HOA letter, the gaslighting, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the woman next door. Sarah is a calm person. She's an ER nurse. She deals with bodily fluids, trauma, and difficult people for 12 hours a day. She listened to my rant, her eyes wide, her expression shifting from horror to confusion to something else. When I finished, she looked at the freezer, then back at me. She was silent for a long time. "So," she said slowly, "you're saving it all up. For what? A museum? A shrine?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "I just know that I can't throw it away. It's potential energy. Every time she drops a bag in my bin, she thinks she's making my life worse. But she's not. She's giving me resources. I just need a delivery system." Sarah looked at the freezer again. She looked at the stacks of frozen justice. A slow, dark smile spread across her face. It was a scary smile. "Her garden party," Sarah said. I blinked. "What?" "The annual Neighborhood Garden Club Gala," Sarah said. "She's been talking about it on the neighborhood Facebook page for weeks. It's the event of the season. It's in October. She's renting a white tent. She's getting catering. She's trying to get the mayor's wife to come. She wants everything to be perfect." I looked at the calendar on the garage wall. October 12th. That was 3 weeks away. I looked at the freezer. I did the math. By my calculations, I had approximately 240 bags. That was roughly 80 pounds of ordnance. "Sarah," I said, "I think I love you." "Don't get mushy," she said, closing the freezer lid with a solid thud. If you're going to do this, you can't just throw them over the fence by hand. You'll throw your back out and she'll see you. You need range, you need indirect fire, you need engineering. I need a contractor, I said. I need someone who can build a siege weapon disguised as a patio trellis. Do you know anyone who hates HOAs as much as you do? She asked. I know just the guy, I said. And that is how we entered Phase 2. The collection was over. The construction was about to begin. Before we could break ground on the weapon, I had to survive the logistics of the occupation. You might think storing a year's worth of canine waste is as simple as put it in a bag, put it in the box. You would be wrong. It is a discipline. It is a science. And like all great scientific endeavors, it was fraught with the constant peril of discovery. My garage became my bunker. The second freezer, which I purchased in August during a heat wave that made the air smell like hot asphalt and regret, was a beast. It was a Frigidaire with a heavy lid that sealed with a reassuring thwomp. But having 2 chest freezers in a suburban garage for a 2-person household raises questions. My buddy Dave came over in late September to help me bleed the brakes on my car. Dave is a good guy, but he's the kind of guy who touches things. He's a tactile creature. If he sees a button, he presses it. If he sees a lid, he opens it. We were drinking beers, staring at the exposed caliper of my Honda, when Dave frowned. He gestured with his bottle toward the corner of the garage. "Since when do you hunt?" Dave asked. My heart stopped. "What?" "The freezers," Dave said. "You got 2 deep freezes now. You bag a moose? Or are you just really into bulk buying frozen pizzas?" "It's a side project," I said, wiping grease off my hands with a rag, trying to keep my voice casual. "Sarah's got this new diet. Meal prepping. Lots of organic slurry, soups, stews. She doesn't want it mixing with the regular food." Dave nodded, but he looked curious. He started walking toward the freezer, the bad freezer, the one labeled "Do Not Open, Biological Samples." "Man, I love a good stew," Dave said, reaching for the handle. "Don't!" I shouted. It came out too loud. It came out like I was stopping him from stepping on a landmine. Dave froze, his hand inches from the lid. He looked at me, eyes wide. "Whoa, okay. Touchy. Is it drugs? Are you cooking meth, Mark? Because you can tell me. I watched Breaking Bad. I know the signs." "It's not meth, Dave," I said, moving between him and the freezer. "It's just very specific dietary requirements. Gluten-free, dairy-free, joy-free. You don't want to see it. It looks like swamp sludge." Dave backed away slowly. "All right, man. Whatever you say. But if you end up on the news, I'm telling the cops I thought you were just really into kale." That was the moment I knew I was living on borrowed time. The horde was growing. The freezer was nearing capacity. I had bags from April, May, June, July, August. I had the spring rain collection, which was heavy and sodden. I had the July drought collection, which was light, chalky, and aerodynamic. I had cataloged them all. I knew the weight of my arsenal down to the ounce, but a pile of ammunition is useless without a gun. I needed the delivery system, and I knew that my own carpentry skills were insufficient. I can design a circuit board, I can code in Python, but if you give me a hammer and a saw, I will build you a birdhouse that collapses if a butterfly lands on it. I needed a professional, but not just any professional. I needed a mercenary. I spent 3 nights scouring the internet. I avoided the reputable sites like Angie's List or Thumbtack. Those people have licenses. They have reputations. They have morals. I didn't want morals. I wanted a guy who had a suspended driver's license and a grudge against society. I found him on a local community forum, buried under a post about selling a used jet ski. The ad simply read, "I build stuff. Wood, metal, concrete. If you want it pretty, call a decorator. If you want it to stand up when the hurricane hits, call Rusty." There was no last name, just a phone number. I called him on a Tuesday. "Yeah?" The voice on the other end sounded like it had been gargling with gravel and cigarettes. "Hi, is this Rusty?" "Depends who's asking. You the IRS?" "No, I'm Mark. I live over in the Oakwood Estates. I have a project." "Oakwood," Rusty scoffed. "HOA land. I don't do permits. You want a permit? You call the city. You want a deck? You call me." "I don't want a deck," I said. "I want a garden feature. And I definitely do not want a permit." There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of a lighter clicking, followed by a long inhale. "I'm listening." Rusty pulled up to my house the next day at noon. His truck was a geological marvel of rust and bondo. It was a Ford F-250 that had clearly been used to ram things. The bed was full of lumber, tangled extension cords, and what looked like the transmission of a 1990s Camaro. Rusty climbed out. He was a mountain of a man. He stood about 6'4", wore Carhartt overalls that were stained with grease, paint, and possibly blood, and he had a beard that completely obscured the lower half of his face. He looked like a Viking who had been forced to work in construction. He didn't shake my hand. He just nodded at the house. "Nice place. Shame about the neighbors." He gestured with his chin toward Mrs. Higgins' house. Princess was currently yapping at a leaf blower 3 streets away. "You know her?" I asked. Rusty spat on the ground. "Mrs. Higgins put in a gazebo for her 4 years ago. She measured the gaps between the floorboards with a micrometer. Refused to pay the final installment because she said the cedar smelled too aggressive. I almost took a chainsaw to the support beams." I smiled. It was a genuine smile. "Come into the backyard, Rusty. I think we're going to get along." We stood on my patio. I had the blueprints rolled out on the outdoor table. I had spent a week on them. To the casual observer, they depicted a large, decorative wooden trellis, the kind you might grow wisteria or ivy on. It had thick, robust pillars and a heavy cross beam, but the devil was in the details. "So," Rusty said, looking at the drawings. "It's a trellis." "Look closer," I said. I pointed to the cross-section of the main support pillars. "These aren't solid wood. They're hollow." Rusty squinted. He traced the lines with a finger the size of a sausage. "Hollow. With internal tension springs? Garage door springs?" "Correct," I said. "And here, at the top. This isn't just a decorative finial. It's a pivot point, a fulcrum." He followed the lines down to the base. "And this planter box at the bottom, it's not for dirt, is it? It's a counterweight housing." Rusty stopped. He looked up from the paper. He looked at the fence line. He looked at Mrs. Higgins' pristine white tent, which was currently being set up by a crew of miserable teenagers for her upcoming gala. He looked back at the blueprints. A slow realization dawned in his eyes. It was like watching the sun rise over a battlefield. "It's a trebuchet," Rusty whispered. The word left his mouth with reverence. "You want me to build a stealth trebuchet?" "A catapult, technically," I corrected. "Trebuchets use a counterweight to swing the arm. This design uses spring tension for a snappier release and a lower profile. It's a hybrid, a kinetic garden sculpture." Rusty stroked his beard. "What's the payload?" I hesitated. This was the moment of truth. If he walked, he walked. Dog poop, I said. Frozen. Vacuum sealed. Roughly 300 rounds of it. Rusty didn't blink. He didn't laugh. He just stared at Mrs. Higgins' house, his eyes narrowing. He looked at the white tent. He looked at the Garden Club of America sign she had proudly stuck in her lawn. She called the cops on me once, Rusty said softly. I was parked on the street, eating a sandwich in my truck between jobs. She said I looked suspicious, and that my truck was lowering the property value of the street just by existing. He turned to me. He extended a hand the size of a catcher's mitt. When do we start? The construction phase was a blur of sawdust, heavy metal music, and subterfuge. We had 2 weeks before the party. We had to build it fast, and we had to build it quiet. Or at least, quiet enough not to arouse suspicion. Rusty was a genius. I had the theory, but he had the practical knowledge. He knew that wood warps. He knew that bolts, shear. He modified my design on the fly. You can't use pine for the throwing arm, he grunted on the first day, tossing my lumber list aside. Too soft. It'll snap under the torque. We need oak or hickory. I got some reclaimed oak beams from a barn I tore down. Hard as rock. We use that. We built the frame first. It went up in 2 days. It was beautiful. 8 feet tall, stained a deep, rich mahogany. To Mrs. Higgins, who watched us like a hawk from her upstairs window, it looked like a lovely, if somewhat over-engineered, piece of garden architecture. "What are you building?" she called out on the 3rd day. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and holding a pair of pruning shears. Rusty and I were tightening the bolts on the main crossbeam. I looked at him. He looked at me. "It's a passion fruit trellis, ma'am," Rusty yelled back, his voice shockingly polite. "Very high-end, imported design." "It looks incredibly bulky," she critiqued. "I hope it doesn't block my afternoon." "It's positioned to maximize solar efficiency for the vines," I lied, "and it blocks the view of the street for privacy." "Humph," she grunted. "Make sure you clean up the sawdust. It attracts termites." "Yes, ma'am," Rusty said. As soon as she turned away, he flipped 2 middle fingers at her back. The real challenge was the mechanism. We couldn't install the springs until the very end, or the tension would be obvious. We built the hollow pillars with access panels on the backside, facing away from her yard. Inside, we mounted the garage door springs, heavy, coiled beasts capable of lifting 400 pounds. We ran steel cables up through the pillars to the pivot axle. The throwing arm was disguised as the central vertical slat of the trellis. When locked in the upright position, it looked like part of the design. But when we pulled the release pin, the springs would contract, snapping the arm down and forward, flinging the payload from a hidden basket at the top. We had to test it. This was critical. You can't fire the first shot on the day of battle. You need data. We waited until a Tuesday night. It was pouring rain. Thunder was rumbling, which covered the noise of the mechanism. Mrs. Higgins' lights were out. We stood in the backyard in rain ponchos. Rusty held a water balloon filled with blue dye. It was the same weight as a standard frozen poop bag. "Range to target?" Rusty whispered. 42 yards to the patio center, I said, checking my laser rangefinder. "Wind is coming from the north, 10 knots. "Adjusting tension," Rusty said. He cranked a bolt at the base of the machine. The springs groaned. "Load," I said. Rusty placed the water balloon in the basket. He pulled the arm back and locked it with the pin. The machine hummed with potential energy. It felt alive. It felt dangerous. "Fire in the hole," Rusty whispered. He pulled the pin. Thwump. The sound was low and percussive, like a bass drum kicked in a library the gate. Arm snapped forward, a blur of motion. The water balloon vanished into the dark, rainy sky. We held our breath. 3 seconds later, we heard a faint, wet smack against the pavement of Mrs. Higgins' driveway, followed by the sound of a car alarm chirping once. "Too long," Rusty hissed. "We cleared the patio. That hit her Lincoln." "Dial it back 10%, I said. "We want the lawn, not the driveway. We want maximum splatter, not property damage." We spent the next hour calibrating. We fired water balloons, wet sponges, and a tennis ball. By 2:00 a.m., we had it dialed in. We could drop a payload into a 10-foot circle from 40 yards away. It was a masterpiece of backyard engineering. "It's ready," Rusty said, wiping rain from his beard. He patted the wooden beam. "She's a beauty." "She is," I agreed. "Now we just need the ammo." The week of the party was a torture of anticipation. I started the thawing process. This was a delicate operation. If the bags were too frozen, they would be like rocks, dangerous, potentially lethal. If they were too thawed, they would be soup. Impossible to launch, likely to burst in the basket and cover us in our own vengeance. I needed the Goldilocks consistency. Slushy, heavy, malleable. I moved the bags from the deep freeze to coolers in the garage. I checked them every 6 hours. I felt like a bomb disposal expert, gently squeezing bags of poop to check for firmness. Sarah came out to watch me one evening. She leaned against the doorframe, shaking her head. "You realize," she said, "that you have put more effort into this than you did into planning our last vacation." "This is important," I said, checking the temperature of a bag from May. "This is about restoring the balance of the universe." "It's about throwing poop at an old lady," Sarah said. "That too." "Just be careful," she said. "And for God's sake, don't miss." Saturday, October 12th arrived, the day of the Garden Club Gala. The Casuso universe has a twisted sense of humor because the weather was absolutely perfect. It was 68 degrees, sunny, with a light breeze. The kind of day poets write about. The kind of day that makes outdoor catered events a smashing success. I was up at dawn. I moved the coolers to the staging area behind the trellis. Rusty arrived at 10:00 a.m. He wasn't wearing his overalls today. He was wearing cargo shorts and a t-shirt that featured a skull wearing a construction helmet. It was his formal wear. "How's the enemy?" Rusty asked, cracking a Red Bull. "Mobilizing," I said. "Caterers arrived at 8. Tent is up. Tables are set. I saw a harpist carrying a harp the size of a canoe." "A harpist?" Rusty shook his head. "We're doing the Lord's work today, Mark." We set up our observation post. I had drilled a small, discreet hole in the fence at eye level. I peered through. It was sickeningly beautiful. Mrs. Higgins had gone all out. There were white tablecloths. There were crystal goblets. There were floral centerpieces that probably cost more than my first car. And there she was, the queen bee herself, wearing a white dress that looked like a parachute had mated with a wedding cake. She was directing the caterers with imperious hand gestures. "Move that tray," I heard her screech. "The shrimp must be in the shade. Do you want to kill the mayor?" "The mayor is coming?" Rusty asked, looking over my shoulder. "She's been trying to get him for years. If he's there, the stakes just went up." "Good," Rusty grinned. "I like a big audience." By 1:00 p.m., the guests had arrived. It was a sea of pastel hats and beige suits. The harpist began to play something tinkly and annoying. The chatter was polite and subdued. I could hear the clinking of champagne flutes. "Status on the payload?" I asked. Rusty opened the first cooler. The smell wafted out, a pungent, earthy reminder of a year of trespasses. "Thawed and ready. We got the spring slush in cooler 1 And the summer hardpack in Cooler 2. We start with the slush, I said. Maximum coverage. We waited. The plan was to strike during the speech. Mrs. Higgins always gave a speech. She loved the sound of her own voice almost as much as she loved her dog. At 1:45 p.m., the music stopped. Mrs. Higgins stepped up to a small podium that had been set up on the patio. She tapped a spoon against her glass. Ting, ting, ting. "If I could have everyone's attention," she trilled. Her voice was amplified by a small PA system. "I want to welcome you all to the 12th Annual Garden Gala. It is such a joy to share my little sanctuary with you." "Sanctuary," Rusty muttered. "She sprays so much pesticide on that lawn, nothing has lived there since the 90s. "I have worked tirelessly," Mrs. Higgins continued, "to keep this neighborhood up to the highest standards. It is a battle, sometimes. There are elements around us that don't appreciate beauty." She glanced toward my house. I saw heads turn. She was publicly shaming me at her garden party. "But we persevere," she declared. "We rise above. We maintain our purity." "Purity," I whispered. "Okay, that's the signal." "Range is set," Rusty said. He was crouching by the winch. "Tension is at 90%. "Load volley 1, I commanded. We had designed a scatter shot bucket. Instead of one big bag, we could load 5 or 6 at a time. I grabbed a handful of the semi-thawed bags. They were cold, squishy, and terrifying. I dropped them into the basket. "Basket is hot," I said. "Targeting the buffet?" Rusty asked. "No," I said, watching Mrs. Higgins raise her glass for a toast. "Target the airspace directly above the patio. We want an airburst effect. We want it to rain." "Copy that," Rusty said. His hand hovered over the release pin. "Fire," I said. Rusty pulled the pin. Thwump! The arm of the trellis snapped forward. It was a violent, beautiful motion. Because of the high fence, the guests couldn't see the machine. They just saw the result. 5 dark, tumbling projectiles soared over the fence line. They caught the sunlight. For a split second, they looked like birds, or perhaps large, exotic seeds. They reached the apex of their arc right over the center of the patio. Gravity took hold. They fell. I was watching through the peephole. I saw Mrs. Higgins look up. She smiled, confused. She probably thought it was a balloon release. Then impact, splat, thwack, plop. One bag hit the stone patio and burst. One bag hit the buffet table, landing squarely in a bowl of potato salad. One bag hit the tent canvas, slid down, and landed on the harpist's shoulder. And one bag, a particularly juicy specimen from mid-June, landed 3 feet from Mrs. Higgins. It didn't burst, but the impact sent a shockwave of recognition through the crowd. The silence was instant. It was absolute. The harp stopped. The chewing stopped. Then the smell hit them. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Is that—" "Reload!" I hissed at Rusty. "Don't give them time to think! Volley 2!" Rusty was already cranking the winch. His biceps were bulging. He was laughing, a silent, wheezing laugh that shook his whole body. "Loading!" I dumped another armful of bags into the basket. "Go, go, go! Fire!" Thwump! The second volley was even better. We had adjusted the angle slightly. This cluster went a bit lower. It was a strafing run. I saw a man in a beige suit get clipped in the shoulder. He spun around, dropping his shrimp. I saw a lady in a wide hat scream as a green bag landed in her lap. "It's an attack!" someone shouted. "Take cover!" Panic ensued. It was glorious. The Garden Club of America turned into a scene from Saving Private Ryan, but with canapes. People were diving under tables. The harpist was trying to shield her instrument with her body. Mrs. Higgins was standing frozen at the podium, her mouth opening and closing like a fish one. "She's not moving," Rusty said, peering through a crack in the fence. "She's in shock. Finish her." "Volley 3, I said. "The big one." I reached into the cooler and pulled out a gallon-sized bag. This wasn't a daily collection. This was a week where I had been on vacation and my dog sitter had saved it all up in one mega bag. It was the size of a honeydew melon. It was the nuclear option. "That's a war crime," Rusty whispered admiringly. "Load it," I said. We dropped the megabag into the basket. Rusty cranked the tension to the max. The wood of the trellis groaned. "For Princess," I said. "For the deck money she owes me," Rusty said. He pulled the pin. Thwump. The sound was deeper this time. The trellis actually shuddered. The megabag sailed into the sky. It was majestic. It was slow. It was inevitable. I watched it arc. It cleared the fence. It cleared the tent edge. It descended. It landed squarely on the catering table, right next to the chocolate fountain. K-sploosh! The explosion was magnificent. Chocolate and other matter sprayed outward in a 20-foot radius. Mrs. Higgins, standing 10 feet away, was caught in the blast zone. She was speckled. She was painted. She let out a scream that shattered the peace of the afternoon. It was a high, thin wail of pure despair. "My gala! My gala!" "Cease fire," I said, leaning back against the fence, sliding down to sit on the grass. My heart was pounding. Mission accomplished. Rusty sat down next to me. He opened a beer. He cracked it. The sound was crisp. "Best job I ever did," he said. We sat there for a moment, listening to the chaos on the other side. We heard sobbing. We heard the sound of expensive cars peeling out of the driveway. We heard the mayor shouting for his security detail. Then we heard the sirens. "Cops," Rusty said calmly. "Time to go?" "You go," I said. "I live here. I have to face the music." "I'll pack up the tools," Rusty said. "If anyone asks, I was never here, and this trellis is a non-functioning art piece." "Deal." Rusty slipped out the back gate, melting away like a ninja in cargo shorts. I stayed in the backyard. I grabbed a book. I sat in a lawn chair. I waited. 10 minutes later, the pounding on my front door began. The police response was impressive. 3 cruisers, lights flashing. They clearly thought there was an active shooter, or at least a riot. I opened the door to find 2 officers looking very tense. One had his hand near his holster. "Sir," the lead officer barked. "Step out of the house." "Officer?" I asked, looking confused. "Is everything all right?" "We have reports of projectiles, hazardous materials being launched into the neighbor's yard." "Projectiles?" I blinked. "I was just reading in my backyard." "Sir, Mrs. Higgins is covered in—" The officer paused. He wrinkled his nose. He could smell it. The wind had shifted. The smell of the battlefield was drifting over the fence. "She says you bombarded her party with feces." "That sounds terrible," I said. "Did you see anyone throwing anything?" "She says you have a catapult." "A catapult?" I laughed. "Officer, this is the suburbs. Who has a catapult? Come on back. I'll show you the yard." I led them through the house. I was banking on the disguise. I was banking on Rusty's craftsmanship. We walked into the backyard. The trellis stood there, innocent and tall. The throwing arm was locked in the upright position, blending perfectly with the vertical slats. The basket was hidden behind the top crossbeam. The springs were concealed inside the pillars. To the naked eye, it was just a wooden structure. The officers looked around. They saw the lawn chair. They saw my book. They sniffed the air, which was undeniably ripe, but wind is a fickle thing. "It smells like a sewer out here," the officer said. "I know," I said, shaking my head. "The wind blows it over from her yard. She has a dog, you know. I think she's been hoarding the waste. I've been meaning to call the city about it." The officer looked at me. He looked at the fence. He looked at the trellis. "What is that?" he asked, pointing to the weapon. "It's a trellis," I said. "For passion fruit. My contractor just finished it." The officer walked up to it. He touched the wood. He didn't see the release pin, which I had removed and put in my pocket. He shook the pillar. It was solid, mostly. "Mrs. Higgins claims you were firing over the fence." "Officer," I said, dropping my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mrs. Higgins is— how do I say this? She's a bit high-strung. She accused the mailman of being a spy last week." The officer sighed. He looked tired. He looked at the chaos next door, where a woman in a chocolate-stained dress was screaming at a paramedic. "Look," the officer said, "we can't prove anything right now, but if I find out you have a hidden mortar in this flower bed, you're going to jail. Do you understand?" "Absolutely, officer. I'm just a guy trying to grow some fruit." They left. They took a statement, they rolled their eyes at Mrs. Higgins's hysteria, and they left. I went back inside. I grabbed a beer. I watched the sun set. Mrs. Higgins put her house on the market 3 months later. She couldn't show her face in the garden club again. The story of the brown rain had become a local legend. No one knew exactly what happened. Some said it was a sewer line explosion. Some said it was eco-terrorists. Only Rusty and I knew the truth. And the new neighbor? He's a nice guy. He has a cat. The cat stays indoors. But just in case. The trellis is still there, waiting, loaded with potential. Because in this neighborhood, peace is just a reload away.